What's good, y'all? It's Timmy Too Dope. I appreciate y'all clicking on this video and kicking it with me today. Today's video is a video that I've been meaning to get around to making, but for one reason or another, it kept getting pushed back. But I'm kind of happy that it did get pushed back now because there's been so many updates so far. I'm talking about Clipse and their relationship with Def Jam surrounding this upcoming album, Let God Sort 'Em Out. They did a interview, they meaning the Clipse, they did an interview with GQ. I forget the author's name, so forgive me, or the interviewer's name, so forgive me on that front, but it was with GQ, and there's a couple news breaking stories or a couple notable stories that I think I made short videos on, and I'm not sure if I uploaded them onto here, so I'll quickly recap those. But one of the stories was talking about how Pusha T doesn't think Kanye West is a man. He said something like, Kanye has, incredible, he's a genius, so he has incredible intuition and he can feel that I know that he's not a man. So it's kind of hard to continue a relationship when, one of the parties involved doesn't think the other one is moving like a man should. So don't expect Ye to pop up on this new Clipse album at all. That was one of the stories. The other one, and this is the one that I'm going to go a little bit deeper on in this video, is the relationship with Def Jam and how that kind of soured. So to catch you up on that, there's a Kendrick Lamar verse that's been rumored for a while, popping up on a song called Chains and Whips that's going to appear on the new Clipse album coming out July 11th. It was rumored, but now it's since been confirmed. Kendrick is on this track. And UMG, who is the parent label of Def Jam and many other labels, but we're just talking about Def Jam in this case, they didn't like the optics of Drake, or they didn't like the optics of Kendrick and Pusha T linking up on a song together because of what I think the GQ author, the interviewer, called it optics, which I love. Basically, they didn't want two of Drake's biggest haters popping up on a song together, especially when they're getting sued by Drake right now. So that whole situation stems back to Drake suing UMG. It does go deeper than that, which I'm going to cover a little later in this video. We're going to get to the Steven Victor interview. Steven Victor is the manager for Pusha T, and I believe the manager for Clipse. So Def Jam had a problem with Kendrick going on that song, and they basically said, either tell Kendrick to censor his verse, or we're taking the song off and we're going to shelf the album. We're not even going to put out the album at all. So Push said, that's not going to work. And he basically tried to call their bluff and say, like, yo, y'all aren't going to drop us, because if you drop us, you're going to have to drop me as a solo artist as well, which I know y'all don't want to do. So it was reported, and at least how I understood it, that Def Jam dropped Push and dropped Clipse from the label completely. It since came out that they didn't drop them. Push and the Clipse paid 7 figures to get released from that deal. And on top of that, apparently that they pay the 7 figures, but they also have to give a certain percentage of the profits for this upcoming album back to Def Jam as well. So an insane situation with the label, with Def Jam kind of spitting in the face of artistry. The album has found a new home. So after they left the label, they were essentially free agents, free to shop around the album. And they pretty quickly wound up with Roc Nation, who's of course owned by Jay-Z, who's always been artist friendly and continues to show that and to prove that with a situation like this one here. As I said, we're going to be talking about the Steven Victor interview, which goes even deeper on the implications of the Drake lawsuit, and it reveals that Drake and UMG have kind of been buddy-buddy ever since Pusha T dropped Story of Adidon. And there's been rumors of certain songs getting blocked, certain verses getting blocked, but now we seemingly have confirmation that that's been happening all these years. So the first question they ask is, when you started to hear objections to the Lamar verse on the Clipse album talking about the chains and whips joint, where were they coming from? Stephen Victor says, UMG has this department where they review lyrics, so it was that department. The real reason that department is there is to protect the artist and the label from from lawsuits for copyright infringement. They do it for all the labels. Some labels adhere to it closer than others. Let's say you interpolate someone else's song. That department is there to make sure that the song is properly cleared. It's not meant to be like you said XYZ about XYZ artists, so we're not going to release this music. So basically, it came from the lyrics review department of UMG, who's in place not necessarily to be figuring out this person's this and this person and we don't like this, but more so for sample clearance issues. But in this case, it kind of raised a red flag to Kendrick might be dissing Drake on this album, which Rob Markman, shout out to Rob Markman, he said that he's heard the verse and he says there's not necessarily anything in the verse that's incendiary or inflammatory or anything like that. Just typical rap shit, you know? So goes on to ask, while you've been working with Push, have you ever had challenges in that department before? He said, in the beginning, no, but starting in 2018, yeah. Interviewer goes on to say, that's the year Pusha released the Story of Adidon, which was the Drake verse, or the Drake diss. He put that on SoundCloud and it's never been officially released on streaming services. Was that a way of getting around any internal objections? Part of the reason, yeah, to avoid that. Also, we never properly cleared it. So that's kind of the the downfall or the negative of making a diss song or any remix on a song that's already an established song. So the Story of Adidon is a remix. It's going over the same instrumental as Jay-Z's The Story of OJ. So essentially, when you get stuff, cleared, you have to get it cleared through like the artist first, who's going to be on it. So Jay-Z, but you also have to get it cleared by the label too. So I'm sure Jay-Z didn't have a problem with it, but UMG obviously had an objection to it because one, it's a Jay-Z beat, but also two, he was dissing Drake on it, who was their artist. So they were kind of looking out for Drake, in which you'll see that is pretty much the overarching theme, that UMG had Drake's back this whole time, and Drake, his red button was supposed to be Family Matters in the back and forth between Kendrick and Drake. He planned to drop Family Matters. That's why he shot a video for it. 3 different beats, went crazy, was talking mad shit because he expected UMG to have Drake's back and block Kendrick's response, which didn't end up happening at all. He released 2-3 songs after the fact. So it seems like UMG had Drake's back, which we'll get into a little later. These later questions that they asked in the interview, but it seems like UMG had Drake's back for a lot of years. But when it came to the Kendrick shit, they said you're kind of on your own with this one. Interview asked, Pusha T mentioned 2 songs in the interview with GQ, Rick Ross's Maybach Music 6 and Pop Smoke's Paranoia, where his verses were ultimately cut. Was that because of the same department scrutiny? Stephen Victor says, yes. What happened on the Pop Smoke song is that UMG thought he was dissing Drake on that song. He wasn't, but they thought he was. Pop Smoke was released on my label, Victor Victor, and I obviously managed Pusha. So they came to me and said, we're not going to put this out now unless you get Pusha to change these lyrics. Even though it has nothing to do with Pop Smoke, they're like, either he changes the lyrics or we're not putting the album out. We're going to take your verse off, we're going to take that song off. They were threatening to scrap Pop Smoke's posthumous album. This is after he passed away. They threatened to shelve his posthumous album because of lyrics in Pusha's verse where they thought he was dissing Drake. Stephen Victor goes on to say, what happened to freedom of speech? First of all, he's not dissing Drake. But how do you get to tell him to just change his lyrics or you're not putting the album out? That is wild. So let's talk about these verses real quick. The Maybach Music 6 verse, I really don't think he's dissing Drake at all. There may be a couple lines you could maybe stretch to make about Drake, but I really don't think. The Pop Smoke joint, though, the Pop Smoke joint, he's definitely dissing Drake. Let's just keep it a buck, bro. The patois, you change for the pop, like, that's definitely to Drake, bro. There's nobody else really that you could make that to. That's the only line that's coming to my head right now, but that thing had at least, 4 to 8 bars that you could probably make towards Drake. So in my opinion, I think he was dissing on the Paranoia joint. I don't think he was dissing on Maybach Music 6 verse, though. Next question they ask is, from what Pusha told GQ, this Kendrick verse they're concerned about on the new record is not dissing Drake either. As I said, Rob Markman said earlier. Stephen Victor says, yeah, I don't know what their concern is, but they were like, there's a line here, we think it's controversial. And there was a line that got leaked that said therapy taught me how to open up, but it also taught me I don't give a fuck. If that's the lyric they're talking about, UMG, Def Jam, soft, bro. There's got to be a different line that that they thought was controversial. Kendrick needs to change it or we're not putting it out. Where did you hear that before? We're not going to ask him to change the verse. You guys are wrong. Stop looking at it this way. None of this makes sense. That was Stephen Victor in reply to Def Jam on that the last couple sentences there. It got to the point where the conversation became, you can't keep putting this guy from being able to put out his art. He's a rapper. Every time he puts out an album or a song, you can't listen to it to make sure he's not dissing someone before you put it out. He has to think about what he's saying before he's saying it in hopes that you might not think he's saying the wrong thing. Who could live like that? That is probably my favorite excerpt of this whole interview because that's so true. He said, how can someone live their life like that? How can someone create like that? How can someone create good, timeless music like Clipse is used to doing when you're writing thinking about, oh shit, is Drake gonna think that's a diss, but is this lyric department gonna think that Drake thinks that this is a diss? And if that's the case, like you're overthinking you can't create like that, bro. That is so beyond whack. He continues to say, I went to them and said, let us put the song out somewhere else since you guys have an issue with it. You guys won't have to stand behind whatever complications come from it. We'll put the song out somewhere else and we'll license it back to you guys when the album comes out. So basically, put the song out, I believe, like as a single. We'll license it to you. Is that what he said? Yeah, y'all can have it. Y'all can put it out as a single. But when the album comes out, y'all license it back to us and we'll put it out on the album. Their response was, how about you just find somewhere else to put out Clipse? Just pay us something. Just pay something to us and put it out somewhere else. Cold, bro. My thing was, we can't do that. Pusha and Clipse are one thing. He clearly doesn't trust you guys. You guys haven't been good stewards of his career. And we could honestly, I could make a whole separate video on Def Jam dropping the ball on so many talented artists. And in this case, Stephen Victor was straight up saying, y'all have not done right by my client, by my, the artist that I represent. Y'all have dropped the ball at every single turn. So they said, find another deal and let's figure out a business. They didn't drop us, which was previously reported. They were like, pay us this money, which was an exorbitant amount of money, a shit ton of money, and we'll let you out of the deal. That's what happened. We paid them money, an insane amount of money. It wasn't like $200,000. It was a lot of money for an artist to come up with. They bought themselves out of that deal. Next question he says is, how many solo albums did Pusha have left on his deal with Def Jam? Steven says, I don't really want to talk about it, but he had like 3 albums left. So for people that don't know, when you sign to a label, usually isn't for a certain duration of time. Usually it's for a certain number of albums. So I don't know how many albums Push put out through Def Jam, but apparently at this time he had 3 albums left that he owed the label, which is one of the big reasons why they wanted so much money. Interviewer asks, so you had to pay 7 figures to get out of the deal? He said, yeah. So at least $1 million just to get out of the deal. And then I think he might end up explaining in the next couple questions, they also have to give a cut of the profits from the album when it does come out. On top of the 7 figures, they owe Def Jam, their previous label, a percentage of the profits from the album when it comes out. Greedy. They ask, how quickly were you able to get another deal in place? They said, or Steven says, it happened simultaneously with getting out of the previous deal. It took a couple weeks for us to figure out the paperwork. Again, it was a lot of money. We kept on going back and saying, can we pay you this amount of money and a part of the profit? Can we figure out a deal where we pay you as the guys make the money from the new release instead of coming up with a large sum of money right now? They said no. They were like, we want our money and we want some of the profits. Again, just greedy. Once I knew what we had in principle, a deal in place with Def Jam to leave, I got on the phone with Jay-Z. I was like, look, this is what's happening. We've been talking about doing XYZ together. There's an opportunity here to do this album. What do you think? He hit me back right away and said, you just made my day. Let's figure it out. What do we need to get done? I went back to Push and said, listen, Jay's going to give us a very artist-friendly deal. We get to own the masters, which is always huge. And they'll put the marketing power of Roc Nation behind it, which Roc Nation is a conglomerate. You guys are friends. It's a great outcome. We worked on the deal in less than 24 hours, which to get a deal, that big done in 24 hours, that's definitely saying something. But I definitely think that speaks to their friendship and the business that they've done in the past. Goes on to say, you had to pay Def Jam a lump sum to get out and also give a cut of what you make off the new record, as I explained earlier. Yeah, we had to give them a cut also, which is insane. But the good thing about it is that Push is in control of his future. Now he has 3 deals in 3 different places at the beginning of his solo career. We put out our records independently with Mass Appeal, which I believe is Nas's thing, which I didn't know actually. I guess if I think about it, My Name Is My Name, I think that was a Mass Appeal drop. I could be wrong. When Kanye left Def Jam, we worked out an agreement with him where he gave Pusha his masters back on the good music side. And now we get this deal with Jay. You can say a lot of things about Kanye. Props to Kanye for doing good business with Push in this sense. We still don't fuck with Kanye, but you got to give credit when credit's due, Push is having way more success creatively, financially, and professionally than he did at the peak of his career, which was when Clipse Grinding came out. Smart and Steady wins the race. Side note, I just went back and listened to Lord Willin'. I'm going back through, Clipse, the whole discography. I think what's the song, man? I think Mr. Me Too beat is better than the Grinding beat. Let me know if y'all disagree in the comments. Goes on to say, what appeals to you about taking the independent route? Steven says, I still think there's a place for major labels, but if you can get away with being at a place that understands the culture that you're in a lot more, moves more nimbly, and can get the same resources that you would from a major, why would you go to a major, especially with the way the deals are structured? I can't agree more. You can get everything and more from somebody that not only looks like you, but behaves like you, has the same mindset as you. You're not dealing with layers and layers of corporate You're not dealing with layers and layers of corporate You're not dealing with layers and layers of corporate bureaucracy and nonsense. And all the artists are not treated equally in the major label system. You see that time and time again, people going with, and it's usually pertaining to black owned things, but it's not even necessarily black owned. Like there's black label execs who don't come from where Push comes from, doesn't understand the things that is going on inside of Pusha's head, doesn't understand the business deals that he's trying to accomplish. He doesn't understand where he's trying to go and where he's been, like someone that's cut from the same cloth as Push, like Jay-Z. It just makes sense. One thing you still hear about the majors is that to the extent that radio matters, they have the muscle there, and they also have an international presence that's hard to replicate. Steven Victor says, cap, all cap. I've done it on a smaller scale and a larger scale. All you need is a team. You can hire and you can outsource a great international team, a great radio team. For some artists, it's definitely more beneficial to be part of a major record label, but you don't need to be on a record label to find success. And I think that's that's something that up and coming artists can definitely take to heart, is that you don't need to sell out to the major labels. And that number that you're getting offered might look good, but there's a bunch of, what do you say earlier, corporate bureaucracy. There's a bunch of legal jargon and shit. There's a bunch of, Dave Chappelle talks about signing the Chappelle Show contract when he was young and seeing a certain figure on the contract, and his eyes widened up and shit. But it said, we own you until perpetuity, which means forever. So yeah, there are certain things that big labels can help you out with, but you really got to ask yourself, is it worth it to be, essentially a slave to that contract, a slave to the label, when with a little bit harder work, some networking to get your team together and everything, you can build a team that can do all the same things a major label can. Maybe not quite on the same scale, but you can do essentially the same things major labels are doing with a lot more freedom too. Obviously, Pusha T and Def Jam had a long relationship. Is it tough to see it end this way? Steven says, Push has been signed to Def Jam for almost 15 years. We've been there for a long time. We've seen different regimes come and go. But at the end of the day, if a relationship is not working for whatever reason, it doesn't make any sense to stay there, regardless of how much you might like it or might feel comfortable. And I don't know if the amount of attention, focus, and detail that we were looking for on this album rollout would have happened there anyway. When it's time to go, it's time to go, bro. You got to follow that gut instinct. And again, when you have a team with you like that, I feel like it definitely makes it easier to kind of take those risks like they did. And then the last question they ask, is this the start of a potentially closer relationship between Victor and Roc Nation? Victor is, I forgot his name, Steven Victor. It's his label, which he's had a few different projects come out on. He answers, I'd say so. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, but the focus right now is definitely this Clipse album. And that Clipse album is coming July 11th. So the Too Long Don't Read, Pusha T and Clipse paid 7 figures to get out of their deal with Def Jam, but still have to pay a percentage of the profits back to Def Jam after the album comes out. Drake and UMG have been blocking verses ever since 2018 when the story of Adidon came out. That's why it only popped up on SoundCloud and never made it to streaming. Paranoia by Pop Smoke. UMG threatened to shelve his entire posthumous album if Pusha T didn't take his verse off of that. They also blocked the verse on Maybach Music 6 with Rick Ross and Lil Wayne, which that would have been a moment by itself because Lil Wayne and Pusha T have had their issues in the past as well. And Def Jam is no longer the artist-friendly label that it once was. I appreciate y'all clicking on this video and kicking it with me today. If you want to check out another video, there's one popping up right here. And remember, if it's not too dope, then it's probably mids.